My name is Vincent Calvagno. I'm an undergraduate history major at Adelphi University, and I'm a cyclist. All right, mile zero, 130 miles to go. It's gonna be a long ride, but feeling good this morning, and yeah, let's go for it. So the goal of this project really was to showcase how there's so much more to Long Island than South Shore suburbia. As a history major and a student of history, I, in many ways, find myself frustrated with the fact that Long Island doesn't preserve its history as well as I feel it could. However, I think through this ride, through this project, the goal was really to show that if you do search hard enough, Long Island has some great historical sites, and I don't think there's a better way to see those historical sites than on a bicycle. So cycling, I think, is a pretty cool sport because, of course, there's the athletic side to it, but beyond the athletic side, I think there's also the side that lets you engage with nature and with history, especially for the goals of this project when we're trying to show Long Island its rich history. It's one thing to see all of that from behind a car window, but it's quite another to ride through the landscape, feel the hills as they ascend, breathe in the air, smell the blooming trees. I think that cycling allows you to do that in addition to pushing yourself. I mean, of course, 128 miles is not a short ride. However, I think beyond that, we really were trying to have an authentic experience during which we could engage with the culture, the history, and the topography of Long Island. Training for the ride was an interesting process, right? Because I had a pretty good fitness peak in June. However, since June, the weather's been hot, rainy, and it's been hard to gauge where my fitness is at. But I've been going for some longer rides past few weeks, going for some group rides, and really trying to find my form. And I think, you know, the ride went pretty smoothly from a physical perspective. And I'm pretty happy with how I trained for it. But yeah, it was just kind of doing the usual, making sure that there's some enjoyment in the sport still. I mean, sometimes you train for things and it gets arduous, right? So I tried to keep it a little bit light while also keeping, you know, some big miles in the legs, and it worked out. But like, don't slow down, just while you pass me, I mean. Moving into this ride, there were a few concerns in my mind. You know, obviously the physical concern, 128 miles is a long ride, long time to be spinning the legs. But beyond that, logistically, like to get things filmed, there's a lot that goes into that. You know, also being able to have time to really process the historic sites. You know, the concern can be speed, can be getting up the next hill. And so being able to have everything come together, have the ride be enjoyable, have the logistics go well, have the route be planned in an optimal way, I think that was something that was really rewarding to see come together. Such a beautiful day, man. You guys are doing a great job.
There's something sort of phenomenal just about the human experience of being on a bike and challenging yourself and pushing yourself beyond what you thought was possible. I'm Craig Carson. I'm an Associate Dean in the Honors College. I'm also known as Professor Carson. For me, really cycling it was fundamentally first and foremost about a means of escaping, a kind of quotidian life. I really was introduced to cycling by chance. A friend of mine and I were biking. We'd gotten new bikes, and biking for two kids in Iowa in the 1980s was essentially a means of transportation. We hadn't really even thought of it as an activity that you might do for fun, much less competition. But we ended up running into a couple of racers. They asked us to join a team, and from that point forward, it became really a kind of an obsession with finding out different aspects of cycling, watching it on television, finding groups of cyclists, getting to the meetups at the bike stores. Really because it didn't seem to be part of the normal life that I'd been living up to that point.
So I've always ridden bikes. I think a lot of us have always ridden bikes in some respect. But as I grew older, I began to take it more seriously. I began to do some mountain biking. Long Island has some great mountain biking trails, Stillwell Woods, Hempstead Harbor Woods. These are some great trail centers. And there's a local cycling group in my town that really kind of introduced me to road cycling. And I think the cool thing about road cycling, in many ways similar to mountain biking, is that you're able to really put yourself in the middle of nature. In a different way to mountain biking, you can cover more ground on a road bike. And that allows me to really engage with the history in the local region. Also, it's really cool to really feel the landscape. You feel connected to the region you're living in when you can feel the hills go up and down. And really, I think cycling is kind of a sport that just keeps on giving, because there are times when you feel burnt out, right? You've been doing a lot of riding, maybe a lot of hard riding, and then you just ease it off a little bit. You get immersed in nature, you breathe in that air, and it really just fills you back up with that joy for the sport. This was a pretty tough route, I've got to be honest. Of course, length, it's a long ride, but beyond that, there was a pretty difficult hill zone from mile 35, 40 through around mile 70, after Cold Spring Harbor into Port Jefferson. And I think I had expected some difficult moments to come. They always come on a century ride like this. But I expected them to come way later on, mile 80, 90, 100. However, I was caught a little bit off guard. I'm a climber, I like hills, but just going through that hill zone was just hill after hill after hill. And I kept trying to keep my pace up, and really I probably shouldn't have been doing that because it's an endurance effort, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But it was really tough to keep my morale up through that hill zone because it was absolutely brutal. Some really steep terrain, some really steep streets. Got the heart rate up a few times, but you know, in a certain way, that's what cycling is all about, pushing yourself, getting through those hard spots. So my favorite part of this ride was probably descending into Stony Brook. I descended into the area of Stony Brook where they have a grist mill from the mid-18th century. And I happened to be studying rivers in that time period in one of my research projects, and so it was really cool to see one of the original structures that would have been connected to the topic I'm studying. But beyond that, also just descending down into this area, the roads were beautiful, narrow. It felt like you could have been in a national park. There were egrets hunting. The roads were perfect for cycling, minimal traffic, hills, descents. It was absolutely gorgeous. Dude, it is so gorgeous. Wow. So I'm studying rivers right now, and it's kind of cool to see a period grist mill in its natural habitat, kind of left preserved. We don't get many of those in this area. In New England, they were all over the place, but this part of Long Island was, in a way, kind of a southern extension of New England when people came down from New Haven. Gorgeous. So this church here was actually the site of a Revolutionary War skirmish. I've always wanted to see it as a Long Islander and someone who studies the American Revolution as part of my work on early America. And man, it's just cool. Like, it's a part of Long Island that you don't always think about. Revolutionary War history at your doorstep. When I was planning the route for this ride, I was trying to balance a really rideable course with also an enjoyable course, a course that exposed me to the history of Long Island. As a history student, I study the colonial period through the American Revolution. And so it was really cool to go to the Setauket Presbyterian Church and see the site of a Revolutionary War skirmish right here on Long Island. It was also really cool as we went further out east to see some settlements, some homes from the late 1600s, early 1700s. I think that we often forget as Long Islanders that in many ways we can be a southern projection of New England, because when settlers from New Haven got here around 1640, Long Island was, for all intents and purposes, a southern projection of New England. And I think that's really cool to be able to ride out on Long Island and see the terrain changing, see the history changing, see things getting older, move into more rural landscapes, see what Long Island might have looked like 50 years ago, for example. And I think that was really important to me while I was planning this route. And so as I was planning the route, as I was seeing what roads I was going down, I was trying to take into consideration what historic sites are on the sides of those roads. And I tried to take some time to visit those sites, to really process them. North Shore Rail Trail. I anticipated having some least favorite moments with the traffic, but to be honest, the route plan excluded most heavy traffic. I also anticipated not much liking a rail trail that I was on, the North Shore Rail Trail. However, the North Shore Rail Trail was really well put together. It was a pretty compelling course. Often cycling paths are very kind of monotonous. It's just the same thing for lots of miles, but it was well put together, and it was just so enjoyable, and that caught me off guard a little bit, because you expect these long rides to be a slog, you expect them to be tough, you expect them to be more about athletics than enjoyment and achievement. And in the end, it really just turned into a really great tour of the island. Just seeing the land change as I got further out east was just one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done on a bike.
My current interests actually were really sort of founded about the same time that I started cycling, quite frankly. I was, at the same time I was exploring sort of alternative forms of sporting activities that were not traditionally sort of part of an American life in the 1980s. I was also sort of, I think, as part of the same pursuit of trying to find kind of meaning and significance in a world that felt sort of flat and lacking meaning and sort of bound up with sort of everydayness. Really got into philosophy and started reading the existentialists and literature. So my interest in cycling and my interest in the things that I now do professionally as an academic really started at the same time as a means of trying to find my own identity, my own place in the world. And so the cycling has, come and gone. The interest in literature, literary theory, literary criticism, and philosophy has been pretty consistent throughout. And for me, they both seem like undertakings pursuing, trying to actualize some sort of meaningful activity in the world.
I motored the past 20-30 miles trying to make up all the time I lost on the hills. And so that never motored this far into a ride, so that's something new. Trying to push 17, 18 whenever I can. But not going as fast as him though. Let's grab lunch.
I was making sure the bike doesn't pull.
I'm actually, I don't know if it looks, I'm feeling pretty good. I know I don't look like that, but judging by how I could be feeling right now and how hard the hill zone was,
Pretty solid.
I could be feeling a lot worse.
There was a lot of hills. I was looking at the speed. Sometimes I saw low as like 3-4 miles an hour. I was like, he's definitely going uphill. So on the flat ground, you're doing what? Almost 20 sometimes?
I never would do that on a ride this long, but this time I was trying to make, which is stupid, I was trying to make up time, and yes, 17, 18. It's crazy how much the topography changes when you get out here.
Oh no, we were talking about it. There's like this. How is this Long Island?
I think it's Gatorade time. I want to have a bottle of Gatorade. I was really surprised on this ride just to see how much Long Island's landscape changes as you ride across it. Starting on the South Shore, the ocean, it's flat. You ride up to the North Shore, Cold Spring Harbor. You're back in the 1840s, it's whaling culture, right? Steep hills, Victorian houses. And then you go further and further out east and you move into some colonial structures, right? The hills persist, but eventually they get less frequent and you get more into a New England feel. It feels like the Massachusetts coast in many ways. And so I was just really surprised to see, as you get out there, then you get into the rural landscapes, some farmland, cornfields, vineyards, and then finally you're at the end out in Orient Point. How much the landscape changes on Long Island as a Long Islander really was something really pretty to see.
I guess I'm not surprised that Vincent is interested in being an academic, and maybe that's because he is also a cyclist. And I do think that those two things not necessarily go hand in hand, but at least sort of inform each other in the way that they have for me. And so it's not a huge surprise that somebody who would be interested in cycling and the kind of long efforts, often solitary efforts, would make sort of a connection with the academic world and the same kind of similar pursuits. There's a kind of physical, mental analog, I think, between those two undertakings. So it doesn't surprise me that Vincent is interested now in pursuing a professional sort of trajectory in academia because he's a cyclist.
To be honest, when I was planning this ride, I didn't expect it to flow as smoothly as it did. I didn't expect the route to be as good as it was. And I was really surprised to see that with some careful planning, you can put together a really great route through Long Island. Some lightly trafficked roads, some real elevation, right? There's the South Shore of Long Island, but that hill zone up on the North Shore, absolutely brutal in the best way. And so that stuff was really cool.
As far as the ride, I know very little about the ride, and so I'm very curious to see how the ride has become significant for him. I am not sure, and it's interesting that I've got my own sort of relationship to cycling and its own significance. So I'll be interested to see in the way in which through this project, Vincent's able to make it make sense in a different way that's sort of unique to him and also now captured on film.
Miles in, feeling all right as far as 100-mile rides go. Now we just gotta wait for this light to change and we'll be on our way and hopefully finishing soon. Like I'm in rural Pennsylvania. Well, Garmin's reading 115 miles, which means not too long until the finish. So we got about another little over 10 miles. This is tough, but you know, it's within reason, I think. It's to the point where I can still appreciate just how beautiful, I was gonna drop my bike, just how beautiful Long Island can be. So, yeah. Whenever you do something like this, one bad idea gives rise to another bad idea. And so, of course, I did this one way. Everything that goes one way can go back the other way, and so that's an option. You know, I've also got some rides. I'm studying New England a lot. I've loved to do some riding up in New England. I don't know, I got some more bad ideas. Empire Trail, we'll go see. But for now, I'm just pretty happy with what I've accomplished. But that won't last long. The satisfaction will last long, but you always keep driving yourself to maximize your potential, see what you're made of, and you know, cycling's all about that. So we'll see what the future brings.
You know, the perception of cycling has changed very, very dramatically in the last several decades. I mean, when I was getting into cycling initially and catching, you know, an hour or two of the Tour de France or Paris-Roubaix on American television, it was very much a fringe activity. And it was still largely couched in this kind of old school European language of sort of mythology and mythological histories and these kind of larger than life characters who are sort of surmounting sort of the natural world. It's interesting that, you know, recently it's become so much more data driven and it's so much more about simply just data, statistics, how much watts a particular rider can generate. So that transformation has been really interesting, and it's gotten rid of this sort of heroic element, and I think that's probably for the best. I mean, the over-mythologizing of cycling was a bit sort of problematic. But there is something fundamentally also human and sort of glorious about being on the bike and experiencing being on the bike and challenging yourself. And even if you are not going to be producing the most watts per kilo of anybody in, you know, North America, there's something sort of phenomenal just about the human experience of being on a bike and challenging yourself and pushing yourself beyond what you thought was possible.
So as we wrap up this project, I really want people to take away just the sheer scale of the variety you can find on Long Island. We think of Long Island in the post-1950s suburbia sense. However, Long Island's history extends back centuries, and I think the sport of cycling is a great way to really experience that rich history and the great topography, the great natural variety we have here on Long Island. So we started at 5:45 a.m. Now it's 3:45 p.m. We did 128.7 miles, average speed 15.31 miles per hour, and we climbed a lot. In fact, according to Garmin, we climbed 5,800 feet of elevation. And if anyone says Long Island's flat, well, this ride is proof that it is not flat. Long ride, 128 miles, 15 mile an hour, 5,800 feet of elevation. That feels good, man. It's been a few years in the making, this ride. I've literally been wanting to do this ride for like 3 years, and now I'm here.
Definitely since high school.
I think that's a wrap.